There we are. I have somebody in the chat. Wonderful. So my name is Tanya Day. I am the site manager here at the Orange County Historical Museum. You might see me popping up and down from my chair to grab my various materials, so my face might be out of the frame for a couple moments. And I might have to get up to admit people too if they come in, because they get put into the waiting room. I want to make sure that they can come and join us. So thank you for being here tonight. We are going to be making some felt moccasins. Now, this is just a way, it is a craft activity. It's a fun craft activity. But while doing it, we're going to explore some of the history behind the real moccasin and the real uses of moccasins. And if you want to follow along, I do have a lesson plan activity with even standards, some vocabulary, some instructions, and all the procedures and materials. So if you, after this presentation, would like to follow along with the instructions, you can watch the video, you'll get an email of this recording, but you can also go to our website, go to Teacher Resources, scroll on down, and you'll find the packet there. So this is what we're going to try and make tonight. I made this a couple days ago, and you can see it's made out of felt, and I've added a few little decorations. So let's see if we can get this, and this is a pretty good one. We're gonna see if we can get this tonight as well. So before I begin, I'd like to talk about the different materials I'm going to be using. First, I do need a piece of paper or cardstock. I like to use something that's a little bit weightier, just because it's easier to use. You're also going to need a pencil and a marker. Now, I use a Sharpie, but you don't necessarily need to use a Sharpie. It's probably better to use something that's washable anyway, just in case. You also need a nice pair of scissors. We're not going to be cutting anything really thick. So, you know, a regular pair of scissors will be okay. We don't need kitchen shears or anything. You're going to need a little needle and some string or thin yarn. So what I'm using is just craft string. It's not super thin. And if you can see my needle, it's not a very, very pointy like sewing needle. It's a crafting needle, which is nice because the eye here, the little hole, it's a little bigger. So it's easier to get that string in there. I always like that. And it's a little bit pointy, but it's nothing dangerous and super sharp. And the most important part is, of course, our felt. Now I've got two nice pieces here, and I tried to go for a color that's kind of similar to deerskin, so we're pretending a little bit. So now that we know our materials, let's get started. And as I'm going along, I'll talk to you a little bit about moccasins and their use, specifically with the OCHM tribe who lived in this area and still do today. So the first thing we need to do is make our foot template. We want to come up with something like this. Now for tonight, since it is the holiday season, I do in fact have my holiday socks on. I don't know if you can tell, but I do have some nice red and green here, and I've got a little Christmas monkey as well. So I am placing my foot in the middle of this white cardstock. And I'm going to trace around my foot, but try not to get too close. The example I showed you, this is bigger than my real foot, and that's what you want to go for. You want to leave maybe an inch or so. You can just kind of wing it. You want the template to be bigger than your actual foot. So let's see. So what is a moccasin? Well, it really comes down to the fact that a moccasin is just a type of footwear. It's specifically used outside. It's not an inside slipper. It is an outside piece of footwear. And traditionally, moccasins are made using natural materials. Natural materials are materials you can find in the world around you. Okay, so I've got a really big foot there. Here we go. I'm just going to cut out that template. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it can be kind of rough. So I mentioned that moccasins were traditionally made with natural materials, things you can find in the world around you. Well, specifically what? Usually, moccasins were made with deerskin. That was one of the animals that was plentiful in this area, the eastern woodland area. And deerskin is very sturdy, but very flexible and very soft. So it's perfect for forming into a piece of footwear. What's interesting is that if you look at the different tribes around America, you can actually see slightly different moccasin styles, which totally makes sense. If you're living here in the eastern woodlands, you've got a lot of forest. You're going to be walking through a lot of underbrush. You want a piece of footwear that's flexible, that's soft, that's going to be easy to walk around on pine needles. On the other hand, if you're living out on the plains and you have sort of hard, rocky surface, you're not going to have the same sort of flexible, really thin footwear. The moccasins might actually have something harder underneath them. But that makes sense as well. Different tribes have different cultures and just different styles. So I have my template here. I only need to make one. It's big enough around. I mean, it kind of curves for my right foot, but it'll pretty much work for both. So I have my felt. And I mentioned that they use deerskin. Well, I do have a piece of deerskin here for you. It was also called buckskin or deer hide. And you can see, I'm gonna step closer. It is so soft. It really is. And look how flexible it is. It's almost like a piece of linen cloth. And it's actually quite warm as well. So this is what they would really be using. I did a pretty good job with my felt color here. I'm impressed with myself. So I place my template onto my piece of felt. And you want to make sure that it's right in the middle. Actually, let me turn it sideways. There we go. Pretty much right in the middle. You don't need a lot of room at the top and the bottom. You're really going to need that room on the side. Oh, there is something that helps me when I'm making the moccasins. And that's, I kind of go to about halfway down the foot, maybe a little bit more, a little bit above or less than halfway. And I'm going to make 2 little lines on the side. Ah, we have somebody else joining us. Yay. I'm going to make 2 little lines on the side. I'll show you my other template. This was a practice template, and I moved it down a little bit. So that's about where I'm going to make my line, about here. Let me do that and I'll show you. There we go, just one on either side, just like that. And you'll see why in just a moment. So I place that down onto my felt, lots of room on either side. It's okay if you don't have a lot of room at the top or the bottom. Now this is the tricky part, and I had to practice a lot for this. You're going to take your marker and you are going to draw a line from the edge of the felt that lines up with the mark that you made. But don't get too close to your template. You want to leave maybe, let's see, if you take your finger maybe to that second knuckle, about that much space. I'll make my line and then I'll show you. And it's okay if it's not perfectly straight. So this is what I mean. We want to have a nice space between the line and the template. And we're actually going to continue to keep this space, like kind of an empty bubble around the template. So just to make things easier, before I do anything else, I'm gonna copy that line on the other side, leaving about the same amount of space. There we are, just like that. And you know what? I think I'll do that for my second piece of felt too while I'm at it. One line either side, lining up with the marks that I made. The next step is we want to get that toe shape. And the way we're going to do that is by connecting the two lines in an arc above the top of the toe. So I'll show you what I mean, and then I'll do it on the second piece. So I need to connect the two lines, leaving a bubble with an arch on top of the foot. Here we go. So as you can see, it's I've made just a little half moon shape there, just a little arch. My Sharpie just jumped right over the top there. And again, the way I've done it leaves that extra space. And remember, our foot template is slightly bigger than our foot already. The rule of thumb I like to do with this crafting activity is don't be afraid to go a little bit bigger than you think you're going to need. It's better to have a moccasin that's slightly too big than slightly too small, because I don't want you to put your foot in there and then come unraveled after all your hard work. There we go. And of course, the next step is to cut this out. And we want to get rid of the smaller part and keep the bigger part. So obviously, I am using scissors on felt, but the Okinichi, they would have their deerskin, and they would be using not scissors, but other various sharp objects. Usually sharp stones. A lot of times, flint was used on the top for projectile points of various arrows or spears. But you could also make scrapers. Scrapers were made out of animal bones, out of strong shells, out of other rocks. And those nice sharp objects could also be used for cutting. An interesting fact that I learned is that sometimes the Eastern woodland Native Americans would dye their moccasins made of deer hide with black walnut dye. So of course, again, that's a natural material. Here I am, that's my first foot. I'll go ahead and cut out my second one now. So they would steep it in black walnut water and it would end up dyeing the leather a different color. And that's always so fascinating to me, that even though this was a functional piece, this was footwear that was, you know, going to get dirty, you're wearing it outside, they still wanted to make it unique and interesting and artistic. Sometimes they would decorate it with shells or beads or even porcupine quills. This is fascinating to me, but porcupine quills, if you soak them in water, get very flexible. They're quite porous. They have a lot of really teeny tiny holes, porcupine spines, and so you can dye those easily as well. But apparently, I talked with Vicki Jeffries. She's a member of the Occaneechi band of the Saponi Nation, and she does beadwork and basketry, and she uses porcupine quills. She said that they don't smell so great when you first start with them, and well, that makes sense. They're from a porcupine. And there we go. I've got my 2 sets ready to work with. Let me just clear my area here. So I have my templates. I have my extra felt. It's always good to hang on to extra felt just in case another craft project comes along your way. So at this point, I am ready to sew. And I want to give you a tip. I learned this the hard way. Now, I don't know about you, you may have done a better job of cutting than I did, but I leave a little bit of marker. I don't know if you can see. I've left a little bit of marker. I don't want that showing on the outside of my moccasin. But a trick that we use later is we turn it inside out. So that means that I want the Sharpie on the outside now, so it'll be on the inside later. We have somebody else joining us. Excellent. So what you do with this guy now is you simply fold it in half. What do we call it? Hot dog style? When I was a teacher, we used to use the hot dog or hamburger fold, right? So I'm just folding the 2 flat sides toward each other. Again, I've left my marker on the outside so that when we flip it inside, we won't see it anymore. So that is, we're really starting to see the shape now, aren't we? And we are ready to begin sewing. Now, I'm using this little metal crafting needle, and I'm using crafting thread, but the Occaneechi, they didn't have that. I keep saying these natural materials, they used what they could find. Well, if the leather, the material for the shoe itself came from a deer, why not use the rest of the deer as well? So instead of a little metal needle, they would actually make needles out of the bones of the animals. Now this one, I believe, because I'm actually, I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sitting right in the middle of our Yesa exhibit right now. Yesa is a Tutelo-Saponi word that means the people. And it's this band of different nations that came together, specifically with the Occaneechi. And we have all sorts of fabulous artifacts here. And 90% of them were made by Occaneechi members. They were donated by Occaneechi members. And this was made, I believe, by John Blackfeathers Jeffries. He's a tribal elder here in the area. So he's still alive. This is not an ancient piece, but it was made using these older techniques. And I don't know if you can see, but there's the hole. It's quite small. It's very light, but it's pretty sturdy. And I think this might even be sharper than the needle I'm using. So even the materials that they used to sew with were made from the animal. Well, what about the string, the yarn? They didn't have that. Instead, they used sinew. Now this is a pretty rough piece of sinew. I obviously couldn't start sewing with this, so they would process it a little bit more. Sinew is also a natural material. You have sinew in you as well. All animals do. This is sort of a fibrous tissue. It connects muscle to muscle, muscle to bone, and it's quite stiff right now. I don't know if you can tell, but when you process it and work with it, you can get it very pliable or flexible and quite skinny. So they would use this in the bone needle. Also, because they were using leather, it wasn't always easy to just go ahead and poke the needle straight through there. So they used something called an awl, A-W-L. Now you'll notice this is also made from a bone, and it's very obvious that it's made from a bone. If you look at that, the shape really hasn't changed that much. And you can see that this is pointy on the end too. This would be used to poke holes ahead of time so that it would be easier to then get your needle through the area. They use this today in leatherworking, but I don't need that because I'm just using felt. So here we go. Got a nice long piece here. Oh, this is another thing I learned the hard way. Before you do anything else, please tie a knot at the end of your thread. That is the worst feeling in the world, when you get to the end of the sewing project and you tug on it to try and bring it tight and it just all falls out. So I'm just gonna do just a simple little knot. You know what, I might do two. How about that? Just in case. There we are. Got a nice knot at the end of my string. And I've got my needle here. Now, we are actually going to start by the heel, right here. We're going to start right at the corner. And here's a tip. If you're working with felt, I found that instead of going straight through, it's actually easier if you go through at kind of an angle. You go through sideways instead of just straight through. By the way, can you hear me okay? Am I loud enough? Fabulous, fabulous. So we're gonna start down in the corner here. And you wanna make sure that you get through both pieces of felt. I'm gonna give you a close-up, but let me make sure that my knot actually works first. Yes, it does. It didn't come through. So let me give you a little bit of a close-up here. Now, you don't have to worry. We're not making actual footwear that's supposed to be waterproof and rock-proof. So it is okay if you're not getting perfect little stitches here. And you don't have to get it very, very tight. But when you're doing your stitches, see how I've accidentally kind of caught it on the edge there? We do want it to be along the open space. Does that make sense? We don't need it to get caught on a corner that's already closed. We need it to focus on the open part there. There we are. And you just kind of keep going along like that. I think I may have cut my thread a little too long. I'm getting kind of clumsy here. And make sure you're getting it through both sides. So I'd like to talk about why moccasins were so incredibly important. Well, of course, for the obvious reason that you need to protect your feet. And they are outdoor footwear. But moccasins were particularly important for the Occaneechi. You see, the Occaneechi lived off the coast of Virginia on Occaneechi Island. And this was actually smack dab in the middle of a bunch of trading paths. One of the largest trading paths, they call it the Great Trading Path or the Occaneechi Trading Path. That one ran north to south. But there were so many smaller trails and paths. None of them were really official or very obvious, but there were a ton of little trails all through this area, north to west, east to south, east to west, north to south, all over the Piedmont area. And the Occaneechi were smack dab in the middle of all of it. So what that meant is they really not just got in on this trading action, but they pretty much controlled the trading action. They were almost like trading superpowers in this way. They were so familiar with the trading paths that they controlled the trade, and they also acted as porters and guides. Now, a porter is somebody that carries your goods for you. And by goods, I mean the actual materials that were traded. Sometimes these porters would be carrying up to 50 to 80 pounds as they walked these trading paths. And so human beings were traveling great distances, hundreds of miles, and they didn't have cars or carts. They didn't even have what we call draft animals, such as horses or ox. Those weren't native to this area. Those were brought in by Europeans later. So it was people doing all of this work. Now, you'll notice that I didn't actually go all the way to the top. And there's a reason. If you were here earlier and you saw my completed one, you see that I had a little bit of a fold down. So I'm gonna leave a little bit there so I can fold it down later. I'll show you both sides here. There we go. Pretty good. I'll move on to the toe now. So the first thing I need to do is cut it, and please, please, please tie a knot in the end. Don't lose your hard work.
I have a question.
There we go. We've got a pretty good knot. Time to start on the toe. And we're going to do the same thing where we start at the bottom and work our way up. So I mentioned that the Occaneechi were like the superpowers in this area when it came to trade. And they controlled it. They lived right smack dab in the middle of all of these trading paths. So moccasins were pretty much the most important transportation tool they could have. Oh, I almost forgot to tie my knot at the end. Don't forget to tie your knot at the end. And by transportation, I mean anything that helps you move and take things from one place to the other, whether that be yourself or something else. And by tool, I mean any object that's going to help you do a job. So the most important transportation tool was the moccasin. So here we go.
Can I ask a question?
Now, in terms of trading paths, what's the point? Why do you need to trade? You know, it's difficult to think in this day and age when you can just go to the grocery store and get anything you need. Let's say it's the middle of winter and I don't know, I feel like I want a tomato and it's not tomato season. Well, I don't know, maybe tomatoes are winter season, but you can always get them. Well, it's not like that back in the day. And it's certainly not like that. Oh, someone has a question. I'll answer it now. Let's see. Oh, I don't see it in the chat.
Somebody just asked, can I ask a question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I didn't hear what, they didn't ask it, so.
Okay, can you hear
If
me?
you'd like to unmute yourself and...
I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can't hear anybody. Try again.
Can you hear me? No?
So sorry, I can't hear you. Do it one more time.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can, that's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Can these be made out of boiled wool?
I bet they could. And in fact, they probably would stand up really well. And by that, I don't mean literally stand up, although they probably could. But they would be so sturdy if you use boiled wool. You can make maybe like baby mittens that way.
Yeah, okay.
Or not mittens, moccasins.
Moccasins. I know what you meant.
That would be a great idea if you use boiled wool. All right, here we go. But also, trading is about getting things from areas that you don't live in. So we're in North Carolina right now, but I am a big fan of plantains. They're kind of like bananas. And they don't naturally grow in this area. You can grow them in this area, but they don't naturally grow in this area. But again, I can easily get plantains. Well, why are plantains in the grocery stores in North Carolina if they're not native here? It's because of trade. People that grow them down in Central and South America ship them up here. And that's how the Great Trading Path worked. The mountain areas had lots of fur, so they traded it down to the coastal areas that didn't have any fur. They also had lots of minerals. There's one particular mineral called mica. It's kind of dark, it's super shiny and strong. And mica was very heavily traded. And if you're talking about the other direction, the coast area had shells. And shells are really beautiful. They were strong. You could use them for decoration. I'll talk about some shells a little bit later. I've got some examples for you.
Were the shells not used as currency?
They sure were, especially the wampum shell. Wampum shells and beads were made out of a particular clam, and it's absolutely beautiful. I have an example I'll show you. It's this naturally striped purple and white clam, and it's so beautiful. It just naturally comes out that way. And they were used as currency. They were also used to sort of seal treaties or agreements, kind of like a handshake. Now I'm almost done up to the top here, but I want to try and get it even where I was there. But the important thing about trade routes, I also want to mention the coastal area, they had salt. Now, this isn't something that you might really think about, again, because it's so easy for us to get these things. But of course, the ocean is super salty. And as the water evaporates in the heat, or as it's, the tide is bringing the water in and out on the shore, it's going to leave behind some salt deposits, because the salt is left behind when the water evaporates. And of course, salt is perfect to make things taste good. But it also helps when you want to dry meat. And you want to dry meat so that you can preserve it, make it last longer, especially through the winter when you're not going to be having a lot of game animals around that you can eat and hunt. And so salt was very heavily traded. Okay, I've just about got it lined up. So I'm going to snip it and tie that knot. There we go. I think that will hold. And I'm gonna wait. I'm not gonna turn it inside out just yet. I'm gonna go to my other one. So again, we're doing that hot dog fold, flat space to flat space. And I'm keeping my, my marker. Now you may have been a better cutter than I was, but I still have a little bit of marker, and I'm leaving that marker on the outside so that when I turn it inside out, it'll be hidden. And it seems like I have enough thread left on here, so I won't move to my other one. The most interesting thing about trade, though, is it's not just about goods. By that, again, I mean the things that were traded. You see, trading paths were also places to trade stories and art and culture and beliefs. And that's, how people traded information as well, right? You're exchanging news. So again, I'm going to start by the heel down at the corner. So I mentioned that they didn't have draft animals naturally here until the Europeans came. Again, that's horses, cattle, something that you can put heavy stuff on the back of them and they'll move it for you. But even if they did, I'm mentioning these moccasins as the most important transportation tool, moving these 50 to 80 pounds worth of goods through these winding, tricky forest paths that aren't necessarily marked. That the experts, the Ochinechee and also the Eno people in this area, they knew where they were going, but it wasn't obvious. You couldn't actually use a horse if you wanted to. The Europeans found this out pretty quickly. So the Ochinee and the tribes in this area, they were trading on the Great Trading Paths and all of the other trading paths in this area for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, they had an entire commerce and economy going. They were, you know, trading goods for other goods, stories, shells and such. And when the Europeans came over, they said, wait a minute, this stuff is pretty good. We have stuff that you want. Looks like you already got a trail. We're going to be doing this too. But they weren't used to traveling hundreds of miles on foot. And of course, if you think about what the Europeans might have been wearing on their feet at the time, the kind of shoes they had, and of course it differs with how much money you had and what your status was. But usually the shoes weren't as flexible, or another word for that is pliable. The shoes weren't as soft and as flexible as moccasins. And so they weren't really the kind of boots that you wanted to be walking hundreds of miles up and down along the river in woodland with. But, you know, most of them were used to traveling with horses anyway. Well, they found out pretty quickly that that doesn't work. These paths were so narrow, they were going up and down the sides of mountains, the trees were too close together. You just couldn't feasibly take a horse through there. So again, best transportation tool, plain old moccasins. I'm going to stop about there. Again, I'm leaving a little bit of room at the top there so that I can fold it over. I'm going to tie my knot. Well, that worked out okay for a while. The Europeans just learned, okay, I guess I've got to get in on the moccasin game. The Ochinee know what they're doing. The people trading here know what they're doing. But as everybody knows, there started being more of a demand. Everybody wanted the stuff that was coming from the New World. So, look, I'm so ready. I've already got the string ready. Gotta tie my knot. The demand for the goods grew. People back in Europe wanted more, which meant that they had to start carrying more on those trails, moving more goods. And it just wasn't feasible to be doing it with, I mean, already these porters were carrying 50, 80 pounds. That's a lot. That's a lot. But to be asking for even more, what ended up happening is that instead of these just really natural paths that went with the landscape, the Europeans decided, we're taking over. We want more. We just can't rely on people anymore. We have to start using these horses. And so they actually started widening a lot of the paths. They started clearing out the forest areas. Had a bit of a knot there. So they widened these paths. Before, you just had to kind of know where you were going. You lived in harmony with the way that the earth already was set up. But the Europeans, because they wanted to move so many goods, did end up widening the paths. And as they did that, they flattened some of the areas. And because there were so many people with horses now traveling along the area, naturally, little trading posts popped up along the way. You know, people get tired or they want to rest. And of course, a lot of the Europeans who were trading along the area, they weren't used to living in the same way that the Ochinee were and finding the materials for food or water or making shelters around them in quite the same way. So these trading posts started popping up to accommodate that need. And the paths got wider and wider. It was no longer about using your moccasins, using your own 2 feet. It was about using horses. And then it was about using carts. And then it was about using cars and trains. In fact, today, Interstate 85 actually pretty much follows one of the biggest original great trading paths, which is absolutely fascinating. The way that humans change their environment, respond to the environment, use the environment, but also the human patterns over time. If we find something that works, we stick to it. So we knew that that area worked. It connected certain cities, and then cities grew up even bigger along that. So that is why every time you drive in a car on Interstate 85, you can think about how there used to be the Occaneechi walking in their deerskin moccasins, carrying shells and salt and fur and mica with trees all around them, and their nice flexible moccasins on their feet. Oh, a good thing about moccasins as opposed to horses, you don't have to feed them. That was another thing. It was almost like it was faster and easier and safer to travel by moccasin because all you had to worry about was yourself and the goods you were carrying. You didn't have to worry about a whole other animal with you, right? Okay, let's see. I'm getting pretty close to being done here. Almost all the way up. And now for those of you who are familiar with crafting projects or sewing projects, you're probably not worried about the fact that we have all of this string and yarn showing, because you probably already know what we're going to do. And I did mention it earlier. We're going to do a little bit of a magic trick and turn this inside out. And you know, I definitely take it for granted that I could just go to the store and buy these materials and that's it. But every time you wanted a new pair of moccasins, you needed a deer. You needed to hunt that deer. You needed to skin that deer. You needed to treat the skin. You can't just take it straight off the animal and make a pair of shoes. It's going to be pretty smelly. It doesn't work that way. You had to scrape it clean. You had to dry it. You had to treat it. So you put a lot of care into each pair of moccasins that you made, which is why people like to decorate them too. I mean, why not? If you're spending so much time and care to make them, you want to make them unique and interesting. I think one more. There we are, pretty much even. I'm going to cut it off. Don't forget to tie the knot. There we are. Ooh, my string's a bit long. Moment of truth. Let me clear my area. Always find a safe place to put your needle. Even though this is just a crafting needle and it's not as sharp, you always want to keep it somewhere you can find it. It's still not pleasant to step on. Okay, so the way that this works best for me is I take it, I put my hand down in the toe. Let's see how we did. I'm going to grab it like a sock puppet, and then I'm going to pull it all the way through. I might have to help it out a little bit. Let's shape it up. Pop out the toe. Hey, that's pretty good. Let's try the other one. Slide it in, and you want to be a little bit gentle, right? Now, if you're a very good crafter and sewer, and I love this idea of using boiled wool, that's going to hold a lot better than you know, just crafting felt. But if you're using crafting felt like me, this isn't the strongest material. The thread isn't gonna, you know, stay in there very, very well if we're too rough with it. So you want to be nice and gentle. My stitches are showing a little bit, but it's not so bad. I kind of like it. It's giving it a little bit of extra flair, extra color there. Ta-da! Now I did show you before that you could fold over. So we'll fold over the tops just like that. Fold over.
Would they have doubled the sole with another piece of skin?
I have to believe so. And especially, you know, I mentioned earlier that sometimes if you weren't living in a woodland area, if you were living out on, I'm going to do a little decoration here. I've got some extra beads and some string. If you were living out in the Rocky Plains, you absolutely needed to have several layers. It needed to be something thicker that could protect your feet against the rocks and even against the heat, right? If you're out there in the deserts and such. But I have to believe so. And I think it also depends on how thinly you scraped the deer skin. If you left it a little bit thicker, then it might be okay. So what I'm doing with this, I've taken a string and I've put a bead on either side. I'm just going to show you, I'll only do it on one of them. I'm going to wrap it underneath my folded part right here. Just tie it in a simple knot. And I suppose if you wanted, you could even tie it a little tighter and almost use it to keep it on your foot that way. Okay, let's see how I did. Are you ready to see my Christmas sock again? Here we go. I've got my nice Christmas sock here. Let's see. Oh, ta-da! There we go. You know what? I just realized if you made this in red or green, it's like making a little elf shoe. There you go. I've given you a 2-for-1. A 2-for-1, a moccasin and a holiday crafting activity. There we go. So before I let you go, I do have some moccasins here to share with you. Like I said before, I'm right smack dab in the middle of our Yesa Journeys of the Ochenechee exhibit. The Ochenechee lived in this area for thousands of years. They kind of popped around the whole of northern North Carolina, Virginia, and we really, with this exhibit, it's going to be up through March, we examine those physical journeys as well as some of the cultural and spiritual journeys they take as well. If you'd like to come visit in person, you can do that through our website. We do ask people to register for a time ahead of time, and you have the museum completely to yourself. It'll look like there's only one ticket, but that's because only one group can come at a time. So let me show you some of the moccasins that we have here. This beautiful pair, oh, they're so nice. Now these, interestingly enough, are actually made of cowhide. These were made in the 1990s. So it's the perfect example of how the Ochenechee are using old techniques that are a part of their heritage, but still keeping it in the modern times. One of the members of our museum board, actually, Beverly Payne, she's a member of the Ochenechee Banded Nation, and she wore these on her wedding day. And she's got some beautiful little blue-green beads. We also have her husband's moccasins. Now these are deer. I love the fringe, and as you can see, actually look at that. It does have another extra separate piece at the bottom. So I was talking a little bit about what they traded, and I mentioned shells, and you're exactly right. Shells were also used as currency, and I have that type of shell here. Wampum. It is so beautiful. This is the natural shell. It's got purple and white stripes to it, just like that, really shiny and gorgeous. But what they would do is they would actually take this and they would shape it like this. Now, this is just a piece of plastic straw, but they would make it tubular, this sort of shape. And so that way they could thread it on to necklaces or bracelets or onto their clothing. And you're right, it was used as currency. It was also used in ceremonies. And like I mentioned earlier, sort of like sealing a treaty. You would trade them to say, yes, absolutely, you know, this is the agreement that we have, like a handshake. Another kind of shell that they traded was what is known as Roanoke. Now this actually was also worn by Beverly Payne on her wedding day. We're so thankful that she let us use these for the exhibition. And I'm not sure if you can see, I'll put it right over my face there. These are teeny tiny little discs. You may have seen something similar to this before. This was another type of shell, really, really smooth little discs there.
Would that be the size and shape of the shell, or would they be made into that shape?
They would be made into that shape using probably stone tools, flints, like I mentioned before, would be shaped into that. Okay. And along with shells, I mentioned how the Europeans really drove up the demand on the trading path. That's why it started getting expanded. They started having to clear the forest. You couldn't just travel by foot anymore. They wanted horse loads of stuff. In particular, they wanted deerskin. Yeah. Because of men's fashion. You see, at the time, if you were a man of any sort of repute, you would be wearing these stylish leggings. Look at that, everybody. High society, high fashion. This was the look. And they were made of deerskin. So it was men's fashion. Interestingly enough, that was really such a driving force of this. And actually, they believe that this is where we get the term buck, B-U-C-K, buck, for $1, because they were trading in deerskin, buck skins. So you're saying, oh, I've got $5. Oh, this costs $12. It harkens back to buckskin. Again, it's fascinating to me that just a pair of pants would cause such global trade demand to the point where they actually had to start clearing forests. And it really makes you think about the way that trade, our interaction with the natural environment, our interaction with each other, cultures that live further away, of how that impacts a little bit of everything. So again, if you enjoyed this and would like to go through it again, I do have the lesson plan up on our website, www.orangehistorync.org. You have to scroll down to the bottom, but it is there. We do have a ton of other activities there. All of them are matched with school standards for North Carolina, the vocabulary, information. I have a lesson there for another craft activity. You can see behind me right here, I've got a little bark bucket, and it's a certain shape. And I have a crafting activity there to help you make a little bark bucket if you would like. This is just paper, but you can do some crayons to make it look fancy. And if you're interested in the moccasins, we actually have a writing contest out right now. All students aged 14 to 18, you have to live in Orange County, 14 to 18 years old. We have a writing contest. It ends December 13th, I believe. You have to turn it in. And Beverly's moccasins are actually featured. We have pictures of 2 different moccasins, and the writing prompt is you have to tell us about the person that wore these shoes. Now, I've kind of given it away in that these are wedding moccasins, but your story doesn't have to be wedding moccasins. It could be any time period, it could be anybody. Really just have fun with it. So check out our writing contest if you would like. We also have some events coming up. Our next event is December 3rd. It is an open hearth cooking demonstration. So it's perfect to kick off the holidays with. It's with Linda Ostrom in the Berry Brick House, a historic brick house in this area. She has a gorgeous big fireplace. She actually trained at Pensbury Manor. So it's going to be sort of 1700s. She's going to be making a Portugal cake. You can sign up for that at our website as well. And you should be getting a copy of this recording within the next few days. And does anybody have any last minute questions?
I've no questions, but I've got a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
You've been spectacular.
Oh, thank you.
No, really, as you're teaching, you gave a lot of information, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you joined us here tonight. This was a lot of fun. And of course it is, it is just a fun craft activity, but it's a great way to explore, real history, I think. It's a different way to engage with the material. So it is almost 8 o'clock. That's almost our entire hour. So thank you so much. We hope that you get to come visit in person. We're open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Again, please register ahead of time. Don't worry if it says only one ticket. That means it's just you and your group. You can bring up to 6 people. You can always contact us through our website. You can call us 919-732-2201. And we don't just have Yesa Journeys of the Okanichi. We also have some other objects here that really take you through the timeline of Orange County history. And we are so glad that we're open and back in the community, and we are so excited for the community to come find us. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your evening. You can contact us at any time, and you should be getting a copy of this pretty soon, and I hope that you had fun.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Yes, happy holidays, everybody, with my little, almost little elf shoes.